politicians now asking if the law was broken with the Solyndra loan. Should taxpayers also be asking if any of these loans be given out in the first place? Why is the government picking winners and losers to begin with, especially when it clearly isn't very good at doing so? Let's ask our panel. We have Carl Jeffers, Gary B. Smith, and Lenore Hawkins. Good to see you all. Well, Lenore, first to you. It clearly appears that politicians understood that there would be political pressure if there were all these billions of dollars of loans out there. That's why they included this provision that we taxpayers get paid off first. But that provision was overridden. Somebody, in my mind, violated the law, and somebody should be made to pay.
Oh, definitely. Solyndra is a perfect example of how the expanding scope of government simply invites abuse, and taxpayers end up footing the bill. A politician's job is simply to create an environment for success, not to select which companies are going to be successful.
Carl?
Well, first of all, I think it's quite possible we may find out that in the same law that they passed, providing for that non-subordination, that there is an exemption, just as the professor alluded to, that allows somebody under some circumstances to make such an adjustment.
Carl, that's why the provision was put in there, so there wouldn't be any exceptions. So political pressure could not be applied, as it clearly was.
Well, but perhaps that under the circumstances that there could have been situations where we would not have been so upset that this loan was reworked. And earlier, David, you mentioned Casablanca, and you said, I'm shocked that there's gambling is taking place. But the next line was, your winnings, Capitan.
That's right,
If this loan had worked out, the fact that many of them were contributors to the Obama campaign would not have been an issue.
Gary B., that brings me back to one of the original emails, which was written by a guy who's a friend of the president, who said the government is just not well equipped to decide which companies should get the money and how much. I mean, that's to the point here, right?
It is the entire point, I believe. To Carl's point, whether the government made money and Solyndra was successful or not is besides the point. Government should not be in the business, as you pointed out right at the top, of picking the winners and losers. Sure, there was a Solyndra out there. What about the competition out there that didn't get any money, and there was competition to it? They picked, for example, the Chevy Volt, which has now sold less than 4,000 units. What about a Ford competing model? They're into health care now, trying to pick out what is called essential services. Well, what's essential to you might not be essential to me. The problem is, you stated government makes lousy venture capitalists. That's a good point. But you know what, David? Everyone makes lousy venture capitalists at some point. The problem is, or the solution is, when I make an investment, I lose my own money.
Bingo.
When the government makes an investment, they lose everyone's money.
If it's my money, I'm going to be a lot more careful about how I spend it.
Yes, and there's a feedback mechanism. Right now, there's no feedback mechanism. There isn't the pressure on the government to make good decisions. Businesses is always going to do whatever they possibly can to gain an advantage. The problem with having government get involved is that government can make these poor choices using metrics other than success. As in the case of Solyndra, you've got graft. You have where cronies get involved, and of course you're going to help your cronies.
It appears so. Carl, I know you want to chime in on here, but I just got to ask you a last question on this. Tesla Motors, they're the ones that make this real fast, high-speed electric car that they charge, I think, about $100,000 for, and only a few people in this country, only the millionaires and billionaires can afford it. Why? That is touted as one of the successful programs. But why should my tax money be going for a toy that could only be paid for by millionaires and billionaires?
Well, part of it has to do with
the fact... Makes no sense at all.
Well, it makes some sense. It makes some sense to the degree that sometimes these more limited applications in the retail market and in the consumer marketplace still provide a catalyst for major exploration or development or discovery that grows. And, R&D research grants, I want to see where all the complaints would have been if the government had not been lending for the Internet back in the 80s.
There are no complaints for any project that is funded by the private sector. But I can tell you, for every project funded by the public sector, by taxpayers, 90% of the time we lose out. Gang, we got to leave it at that. We still have a lot more still ahead.
The Occupy Wall Street crowd calling for an end to government bailouts for private industry. But the real capitalists are cheering for them. We're calling out the hypocrisy. The Wall Street Journal's Stephen Moore is here with that. Then, dream or nightmare. California lending a helping hand to illegal immigrants heading for college. But who's lending an economic hand to Cali? The state's former governor, Pete Wilson, is here to dissect this broken dream money problem. And the tanning industry's getting burned. Our panel is heated up over the new government ban they say should fry. Stay tuned.
Those first young men.
Tanning beds on the hot seat, one of the first businesses hit by Obamacare with a new 10% tax. And now California's become the first state to actually ban tanning beds outright for minors, even with parental consent. So is the government trying to shut down the tanning industry altogether? And what might be next? We welcome back our panel. Lenore, are you concerned about this?
Well, clearly, given my rather reflective capacity, I'm not a big, not a big user of tanning beds. However, what the hell's going on? You can't make this stuff up because California doesn't have nearly enough to work on. That State Senator Lieu has the time to decide that tanning is too popular in the state, so he wants to use the legislative power to control the popularity of a legal service.
Yeah. And Gary, again, if it can happen with tanning, can it happen with anything else that is considered to be unhealthy or unsafe?
Already has, David. Look back, I'm sure you remember about 22 years ago when the government said no to Alar, which was used in the Apple industry. Oh, yeah. Cost the Washington Apple industry over $125 million. Of course, that later turned out to be incorrect, and they recanted it, but the damage was done. Apple growers went out of business. Because of that, Apple prices plummeted. So when the government steps in and imposes its will on what they think knows best, industries get hurt, industries close. I think it can happen in the tanning industry.
And, Carl, if timing is everything, of all times to do this, when the economy's hurting right as it is right now, it's the worst possible time for this.
Well, I think that tanning as an industry is considered to be expedient and is probably a victim of the timing. The fact is that because there's so much attention on the unemployment and on the problems in the economy, that those who would defend tanning really don't have much airtime right now. I mean, and so...
Well, we're giving them airtime.
Well, what we're giving, though, is to those who are attacking it. Yeah. And it's because it's being attacked that we're really creating the interest in it. The reality is there was always the interest in protecting. And what my concern is that we are too quick to criticize the government for researching, for evaluating, and for coming out with warnings. I mean, I welcome a
warning is one thing,
interest.
Lenore. I mean, I don't mind warnings at all, but what I mind is the strong arm of the government shutting down an industry or trying to.
Information is one thing. Using legislative power to restrict the usage of a legal service, the FDA has determined that this is an acceptable legal service. So the legislative branch should not be getting involved in determining how much of this can be used.
Well, and of course, Gary, there's also the question of parental consent. I mean, even with parental consent, parents are supposed to decide up to a point. Because sometimes parents make awful decisions that could be life-threatening for kids, but I don't think this is one of them.
No, look, I agree. Parents make lousy decisions. I've made lousy decisions with my kids, but what bothers me is it's my decisions for my kids that I make or don't make. It's like government going into the fast food industry and deciding you need to be healthier. What's next? That they decide, wow, French fries, which we all know are bad for you, those are going to be banned because those aren't healthy. That's the problem I have. That's the problem I think most people have.
And Carl, you don't like the nanny state, do you?
No, but listen, I mean, Gary just talked about, he said, admittedly, and we acknowledge this because he's part of society, that he's made bad decisions with his kids. Right. The reality is that we can't be qualitatively subjective about the government having the authority when people make, not Gary, but when parents make decisions
where do you draw the
bad
line,
raising,
Carl?
Bad parenting.
Carl, I understand, but
yes.
Where do you draw the line? I mean, obviously, if a kid is being abused by a parent, you draw the line there.
And that was my point there.
Isn't this at least a close call for you?
I'd say it's a close call, but I would expect that the congressman, the state legislature, Senator Lieu, has the evidence that suggests that tanning does cause cancer.
Why do you trust the politician?
I don't trust him. I don't know the guy.
But you said you assume that he has the evidence. I don't assume. Lenore, do you?
And that's what's wrong with
Where Where are children going to learn that to be successful in life, they need to learn how to make good decisions? They need to learn to trust their own judgment and how to exercise
They don't
their
need
own
a tanning bed to learn that.
They don't. They do not need to trust the
Thank you
government.
very much. Well, sometimes success can make businesses a little cocky, and sometimes